Welcome back to another episode of Sacred Wild Man. My name is Roy, and today I feel inspired to share some reflections that I have around rage. Now, this has come about because this past week, and probably even for a good amount of time before that, I've felt pretty exhausted and ping-ponging back and forth between just the exhaustion and then motivation, passion to move forward in some of these changes I'm making in my life. And there's just a lot of emotions that get stirred up. And while for the most part, any close friends of mine would say, generally, Roy, you're pretty even-keeled, at least how we see you from the outside. There's a lot that goes on internally that doesn't always make it to the exterior, unless I am working in a one-on-one session with a therapist or coach, or just talking to a friend in a more intimate and vulnerable way. And this has me, realizing that there are certain emotional states that I prefer to be in compared to others, which is probably true for many of us. We prefer to be happy and joyful as opposed to feeling depressed, feeling irritated, feeling mad or sad. And as much as I speak about the importance of making room for all of your emotions, there's something that happens for me, and I think many people who progress on their path of, healing or evolution. We can get to a certain point in that journey where we say to ourselves, you know what, I think I got things together pretty well, and I will just ride the waves of life, and I will do so in a non-reactive, very centered and grounded way. While that is true, I think there are also those moments where we continue to get pushed against our growth edge that we didn't know was there until we're up against it. And then we reach another level where something more is demanded of us, while we can still hold tightly to that sense of, well, I should have things together by now. I should be a lot more grounded. I should be a lot more centered. I shouldn't have so many emotions stirred up. And so there's a lot of shoulds. And I think one of the best ways that I've heard this spoken to is a guy named Javier Dagba. And he has, in his most recent Instagram post, written, "Emotional intelligence is not about repressing your less emotionally mature parts. It's also about creating the appropriate spaces for them to be expressed. Expecting equanimity from yourself 100% of the time is spiritual perfectionism. It has the potential to repress your authenticity. It may cause you to put on a mask of having it all together even when your inner world is raging. Many people are walking through life with a poker face on. And challenging times like the ones we are navigating tend to amplify these patterns. We are navigating times where the poker face is getting heavier and heavier to carry. Can you feel it? Here is a very strong opinion. Repression and suppression do not work when it comes to personal transformation. Do you agree?" And I would say I do agree with what he has shared here. The less emotionally mature parts that we tend to label, probably the rageful part, the one that throws a temper tantrum, the part of us that might sometimes feel like, I'm so fucking soft, I'm a crybaby, or what else? Victim, being victim-minded. Those are things that are very easy, I think, for most people to generally dismiss. We dismiss it within ourselves, and if we see it reflected in the external world, we can dismiss it in other people. And I would say there's a difference between looking at that in a way in which you are completely identified with it. So, I am rage, or I am a victim, or I am a fucking crybaby. There's a difference between that, where you're completely identified and consumed in that state, versus saying something that's more conscious and intentional, like, I am making room for myself to express rage in this moment. That's what is true for me. Or I'm making room in this moment to, you know what? Feel like a victim. I'm gonna let myself feel like a victim, a complete victim right now. I don't necessarily like it, but hey, it's gonna be what I'm gonna let myself feel right now, because I can't suppress it or repress it. I want to feel like a victim right now, and not expect anybody else do anything or cater to me, but just allow that experience to run through my body, because otherwise, I might distract or try to bypass it. So this brings me back to rage, which is something I've experienced this past week, weeks and months before. And usually the way I process it has been screaming in my car. I'll journal or I'll record an audio recording about it. It's a combination of the mental and also the physical, needing to physically emote and express it. And something that I notice with rage is, until it is honored and given space to be expressed, it's always like a kind of like a suppressed fart or a suppressed burp. It's never really released. And so there's always something deeper there that needs to be witnessed, first and foremost by yourself. And this is where some scenes in movies stick out to me. There's Forrest Gump, where Lieutenant Dan is, when he and Forrest are on the shrimping boat, and there's a storm that hits, and he is at the top of the mast, and he is essentially challenging and testing God in the storm. When I thought of that recently in regards to my own rage, I rewatched it. This time I was almost brought to tears watching it. And then the other scene that comes to mind is one in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 with Andrew Garfield. Was it 2 or 1? I think it's 2. No, it's 1. Where Captain Stacy dies, and he screams in, you could say, rage, grief, agony at his death. And both of those scenes have a special place in my heart, because they reflect to me what is within myself. And I think there's something important about being able to honor our rage as sacred in a manner that is not destructive towards ourselves, so harming ourselves or harming another person, but in a manner in which we are completely honest with ourselves to say, this is fucking true right now. This is the reality. I am feeling absolute rage. And I don't know what to do about it other than just to express it right now, with myself or with someone who is trustworthy, who can hold a container for me without trying to fix, without trying to judge, but allow me to have my process. I think rage in and of itself, sometimes why it builds up to that degree, is also because it itself is seeking our attention. It itself is seeking us to honor it by saying, you are valid, I completely feel you and see you right now. What do you want me to know? Because otherwise I would be ignoring you, I would be bypassing you. One of the ways in which I've noticed myself do this is sometimes I can get stuck in doing the inner work or the shadow work. All right, what's this revealing about myself? What do I need to dig further into? Sometimes doing the work itself is kind of, from a mental level, an avoidance of the actual felt experience. There can be a lot of this outsourcing to some external thing. Maybe there's this coach, maybe there's this therapist, maybe there's this program, maybe there's this book to read, maybe another YouTube video that's inspirational to listen to, or some more meditation to do, that will give me relief. We're looking for that saving grace, and it always seems to be outside of our grasp. And this is where I think our rage, I used the word sacred earlier, I think there is something sacred in it, in that it actually can crack us open in a connection with the divine. However you might conceive of that for yourself. You could call it God, call it source, creator, specific deities, higher self, what have you. There's so many different things you could phrase it as. But the sense that I get is there are few things quite like rage that can crack us open. Because usually there's something else that I've noticed that follows in my experiences of rage, where the rage cracks me open, and then I start to feel the grief. And then after that, there's this sense of, a strange sense of peace. And both the scenes I described earlier, from Forrest Gump with Lieutenant Dan and then The Amazing Spider-Man, you see both of those things. You see the rage, the madness, the grief, and then there's the reprieve after it. And I think there's something to be said about either testing God or testing ourselves in that manner of surrender. Because when you're cracked open by rage and the grief underlying it, it is a deep moment of surrender. The thought of, how many of us growing up have had parents, family, or community who have been completely okay with us expressing whatever emotion was very real in the moment. Okay? Especially, say, a temper tantrum. Usually that's not the case. Right? Usually we're told, shut up or I'll give you something to actually cry about. Or, you're embarrassing me, you need to keep it together. A good kid, good boys, good girls, they keep their attitude together for mommy and daddy. Don't embarrass us like that. So we just hold it in. In doing so, we deny a very intimate and real part of ourselves. And then we use that blueprint to walk about the rest of our lives. I think there's something deeply poignant and loving about how when we can be cracked open by our own rage, there's an invitation from the divine. As if the divine creator or source, loving presence is saying, you've worked really hard in your life to try to keep it together, to keep up a spiffy, clean, glossy image. I would love to welcome from you to share a more intimate and true part of yourself that you probably don't believe is lovable. I would love to encounter you in this way. This is real. This is true. This is raw. You're not operating under any false pretenses. This is the you that I'm looking to see, that I've been wanting to see. And when that happens, that seems to be where some of this mix between grief and peace and solace comes in. And then there's stillness. Like the storm and the hurricane has moved in, and then it has passed. But that can't happen if we are always trying to suppress or repress our rage because we think it's unacceptable based on childhood experiences or societal expectations, or we're hard on ourselves, like, I should be spiritually, emotionally mature and evolved enough by now to not have to feel this, right? I should have eliminated all my triggers and all of that stuff. There's so many different standards we can hold ourselves to that keep us from being very honest with ourselves, the people around us, and with the divine. And so I think in these moments when maybe the divine is testing us, or in reverse, we're testing the divine, it could be this sacred and holy invitation from the divine to say, yeah, bring your mess, bring your rage, throw whatever you think you can throw at me, because this is where I want to meet you. This is where I want us to meet. Again, you're not hurting yourself or hurting anybody else, but we are doing honest, real, raw, authentic encounter right here, right now, just you and me. And then there's just something beautiful about that. I am out of words really to describe it. It really is only something that can be captured through, say, poetry, and most importantly, your own experience and encounter with it. Your moment of being Lieutenant Dan on the mast shouting into the storm, or your moment of being Spider-Man shouting in anguish. That's where you can encounter yourself. That's where you can encounter the divine. And in that supreme and very tender moment of surrender, something magical happens, and it's incredibly subtle. And so I simply just wanted to share that today, and as an encouragement to myself, a reminder to myself, as well as to anybody else out there who is feeling the pangs of their rage, their grief, not having a place to express it, that this be an invitation to encounter that within yourself, and encounter that in relationship to the divine within you, and the divine that is all around you. And I would love to hear how that goes, or hear any comments from people who know what I'm talking about, who have experienced it, and any stories you might share about how your rage, being able to connect with that part of you without hiding it, has been transformative in your life. So that is all, and I thank you for tuning in.